In New York, the Sanford family decides to take a break, so they rent a house on Long Island near a forest. The place is lovely, but the liquor cabinet is locked. As the family gets comfortable, Mom Amanda heads to the store for food. She sees Danny packing his truck with lots of stuff. Later, at the beach, daughter Rose spots a big oil tanker coming close. Everyone panics and runs when it hits the beach, but no one is hurt and the beach closes for the day. Back at the house, the Wi-Fi and phones don't work. Amanda and her husband Clay are surprised to see deer in the yard, which they think is a good sign. That night, Amanda hears a noise and someone knocks. Clay is ready to confront an intruder, but it's businessman George and his daughter Ruth. They own the house and Amanda rented it from George via email. George is sorry for showing up without warning, but there's no phone service. They try to return to the city after a concert, but there's a big power cut. Living on the 14th floor with George's bad knee, they decide to stay here. Amanda doesn't like it and doesn't trust them. George offers a half refund and says they'll stay in the basement guest room. He shows he's the owner by opening the locked cabinet, secretly hiding a gun, and taking out an envelope with $1,000 as compensation. Amanda still doesn't trust him, thinking he might be the caretaker. Clay persuades her to let them stay. George opens the liquor cabinet and shares a drink, telling them about the house and that Danny was his contractor. George also shares that his wife is currently traveling for work. Amanda, wanting proof, asks for his ID. However, George explains he left his wallet in his other coat at the theater amidst the chaos, raising Amanda's suspicions since he mentioned not knowing about the blackout earlier. Suddenly, an alarm sounds. Ruth turns on the TV, revealing a national emergency. With no other choice, Amanda lets George and Ruth stay. Once in the basement room, it's shown that George had prior knowledge of the situation because a client had warned him. The next morning, Amanda finds 4 emergency texts on her phone, 2 about the blackout, one suggesting hackers might be involved, and another with just random symbols. Before she can show Clay, the messages vanish. Clay heads to town for a newspaper but gets lost as GPS fails. While trying to find a signal on his phone, he misses a brief car radio broadcast stating that a cyber attack caused an environmental disaster in the south, affecting animal migration. Unable to get a signal, Clay continues driving and encounters a Spanish-speaking woman asking for help on the road. Unable to understand her and feeling uneasy, Clay decides to drive away. Meanwhile, he notices a drone trailing red smoke, which turns out to be red leaflets. Concurrently, George drives to check on his neighbors, armed and anxious as he hasn't heard from his wife, who was due back today. No messages get through. He finds the neighbor's house abandoned, with random items scattered in the garden and the door open. Inside, it's a mess. He tries using their satellite phone, but it doesn't work, indicating all American satellites might be down. George is about to leave the neighbor's house when he notices more items scattered near the beach. Following the trail, he stumbles upon an expensive watch in the sand. As he reaches for it, he's horrified to find it attached to an arm and then discovers a pilot's body. Realizing a plane has crashed nearby, he hears another plane approaching and quickly hides in his house just before it crashes too. Back at the house, Rose is upset because she can't watch the final episode of Friends due to the devices not working. She runs outside and is surprised to see a large group of deer in the backyard. She persuades her brother Archie to explore the forest with her, where they find an old shed. Inside, Archie scares Rose by suggesting someone could be watching her through the window, causing her to bump her head. On their return, Archie gets bitten by a bug, and Rose notices more deer and birds flying away. When George returns, he confesses to Amanda that he had suspicions something was wrong due to unusual market activities. He then describes the beach scene, but their talk is cut short by distant explosions and a piercing sound that causes window cracks and pain in their ears. Amanda rushes to the forest to find her kids, but the noise is so intense she collapses in agony. Thankfully, the noise soon stops, and they all return to the house. Amanda recalls seeing Danny stockpiling supplies and suspects he knew something was amiss. Clay returns with a Persian leaflet, which Archie recognizes from video games and translates as "Death to America." Fearful, Amanda and Clay decide to drive to a relative's in New Jersey, despite George's warnings. On their way, they encounter sirens and a roadblock of identical, brand-new, self-driving white cars, with no one in sight. More self-driving cars suddenly start coming up behind them. Amanda quickly gets back to her family and moves their car out of the way just as the speeding cars smash into the blockade. The Sanfords escape, narrowly avoiding more cars, and notice the chaos extends towards the city. Left with no other option, they return to the house, where George agrees to let them stay again. As it begins to rain, Archie retreats to his room, initially looking at pictures of Ruth inappropriately, but feeling ill, he decides to sleep instead. Meanwhile, Ruth asks Clay to join her for a smoke, where Clay confesses his guilt about not helping the woman on the road. Then, they hear splashing and discover flamingos in the swimming pool. Inside, Amanda and George share a drink. George reveals a wealthy Pentagon client warned him of a sinister global cabal, prompting him to move his assets and seek refuge at this house. Wanting to distract themselves from the grim situation, George shows Amanda his music collection, and they dance, sharing a close moment. However, they acknowledge their marital commitments and George's fear that his wife may be dead. Suddenly, the screeching noise returns, shattering the lights and scaring off the flamingos. They resort to using candles for light, and both families decide to sleep together for comfort. The next day, they find Rose missing, likely having taken a bike. Archie wakes up with a fever and vomiting blood, discovering his teeth are falling out, possibly from the bug bite. George offers to take Clay and the sick Archie to find Danny for medicine, while Amanda and Ruth head into the woods to search for Rose. After a long, unsuccessful search, Amanda and Ruth take a break at the shed, where an argument breaks out. Despite their mutual dislike, the argument helps them understand each other a bit better. At that moment, Amanda and Ruth hear a peculiar noise outside. Amanda steps out and notices bike tracks, but then hears another sound and sees Ruth encircled by deer. Without hesitation, Amanda runs to help Ruth, and they both start shouting at the deer, which eventually scatters, allowing them to embrace for reassurance. Meanwhile, the men reach Danny's place, but are stunned when Danny emerges armed. He shares that a similar noise in Cuba years ago caused radiation sickness, possibly explaining Archie's condition. He also mentions Russian personnel leaving Washington, hinting at a possible war. Despite George being an old friend and Clay offering payment, Danny prioritizes his family's safety and refuses to assist them. He suggests they try the neighbors who might have a bunker. George, desperate for medicine, draws his gun, leading to a tense standoff. Clay intervenes, pleading for the medicine, citing their shared desire to protect their families. Danny is moved and agrees to trade the medicine for money. After administering the medicine to Archie, Danny reveals his belief that Koreans are behind the attack. Clay shows the Persian leaflet to argue it's Iranians, but Danny counters with information from a San Diego friend who saw leaflets in an East Asian language, either Korean or Chinese. Danny suspects multiple U.S. adversaries are collaborating to bring down the country. On their way back, George reflects on Danny's insights and shares a theory he heard, a three-phase strategy to dismantle a nation's government from within. The first phase involves isolating citizens by cutting off communication and transportation, leading to fear and uncertainty. The second phase, synchronized chaos, sees people turning against each other, distrusting information sources, which could be manipulated by hackers or misleading leaflets. Subsequently, Stage 3 would naturally unfold. Residents might initiate a revolt or a civil war, leading to the nation's downfall. Clay and George decide to unite and move their families to the neighbor's bunker for safety. In the forest, Amanda and Ruth continue their search for Rose. They stop in shock when they witness the Manhattan skyline ablaze, with sounds of explosions and gunfire echoing from the city. Unbeknownst to them, Rose is actually in the neighbor's house. She had broken in and was indulging in plenty of food when she hears her mother's voice calling her. Just as she's about to respond, Rose spots a light from the basement and decides to investigate, discovering a well-stocked emergency bunker. It has everything one might need, including a gym, a greenhouse, and an emergency alert system. The system warns of attacks on the White House and major U.S. cities, leading to rising radiation levels around populous areas. Rose finds an extensive collection of DVDs, including her beloved Friends. She eagerly grabs the final episode disc, finally able to watch the climax of her favorite series.